Good afternoon and welcome. We appreciate your patience. I'm going to get started. My name is Dr. Sandra Davis, and as chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the Temple University College of Health Professions Alumni Association, I am delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's event. Today's webinar, How Community Investment Translates to Safer Communities, is the third webinar in a series hosted by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our goal in providing this series is to bring together concerned individuals from not only the Temple community, but also from other institutions and organizations to examine our most pressing community issues. Our aim is to push beyond the status quo and move our conversations to an exploration of root causes and real solutions with a critical analysis of underlying systemic and institutional laws, policies, and practices. Our discussion this afternoon is framed around the work of YEAH. YEAH is the acronym for Youth Empowerment for Advancement Hangout, a community-based nonprofit embedded in South and Southwest Philadelphia that works with teens and young adults who are impacted by violence. It provides safe and authentic hangout spaces while elevating teen voices and promoting teen action to reduce community and violence and push back against oppressive systems. YEAH's approach focuses on culturally appropriate and holistic engagement relevant to the modern Black teen experience. Since its inception in 2018, YEAH has impacted over 278 teens and youth. With all voices at the table, today's webinar brings together committed advocates, youth, and politicians to examine youth and violence in the community from a strengths-based approach. I am pleased to have the honor of introducing our distinguished panelists. Representative Malcolm Kenyatta currently serves as Vice Chair of the Philadelphia delegation. Representative Kenyatta is a member of the Governor's Task Force on Suicide Prevention and holds a host of committee leadership positions. As a legislator, Representative Kenyatta has championed proposals to address generational poverty, raise the minimum wage, protect workers' rights, increase access to mental health care, address gun violence, and protect our digital infrastructure. Council member Jamie Gauthier, a born and raised West Philadelphian, was elected to represent the 3rd Councilmanic District in November of 2019. With 2 decades of experience fighting for fairness, equality, and justice in neighborhoods throughout the city, Councilmember Gauthier brings a depth of knowledge related to community and economic development, grassroots engagement, and nonprofit administration. James A., co-founder of YEAH, has lived and worked in the same Philadelphia communities throughout his life. Mr. A's background includes managing mental health symptoms, counseling, and connecting youth and adults to sustainable support systems. Mr. A has expertise in providing intensive support in community, home, school, and hospital settings, and serves as a liaison between the community and systems to ensure access to culturally appropriate and quality supports. Yair Black, born and raised in West Philadelphia, has been part of YEAH since February of 2021 and plays a major role in talking to local politicians about supporting young people's needs related to gun violence and the juvenile justice system. Kendra Vandewater is co-founder of YEAH. Her life's work is to improve the quality of life for people on all levels. As a licensed social worker, Ms. Vanda Walters' expertise includes work on local, state, and national levels to improve conditions of confinement, reduce violence, and improve how Philadelphia responds to homicides and provides services to residents after violent tragedies. Ms. Vandewater is a member of the Alumni Association's Board of Directors and is a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our moderator for today's session is Juwan Bennett. Mr. Bennett is a professor of instruction in the Criminal Justice Department at Temple University and a PhD candidate in criminal justice. Mr. Bennett implemented the My Brother's Keeper Criminal Justice Initiative and currently serves as the reentry coordinator at the Youth Sentencing Reentry Project. Before turning the microphone over to Mr. Bennett, our moderator, I invite you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the right-hand corner on your screen to submit your questions. Our panelists will respond to questions after the panel discussion. Thank you. And at this time, I will turn the microphone over to Mr. Bennett, our moderator for today's session.
Thanks, Sandra, for those beautiful introductions. And if I could just add a little bit, I would say that even given all the respective work that all of my colleagues are doing this call, I would say that the most important thing that you probably could add into their bios that they're all Temple made and that we're all fellow Owls and that Owls are everywhere. So it's good to have you, Kendra, James, Jair, State Representative Malcolm Kiata, and Council Member Jamie Gautier for the call. As a criminologist, what is really interesting is the conversation surrounding public safety and how to keep communities safe has traditionally been centered around what we call the 3 C's of the criminal justice systems, which is cops, courts, and corrections. But what has kind of been under conceptualized or less talked about is actually the 4th C, which is community. And as we talk about how to invest in communities to keep communities safer, it becomes really important given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, global pandemic, police brutalities, racial divides, and civil unrest. And so hopefully for the short time that we have together on a ground level, on a city government, local level, and even on the state level, we can talk about community investments and how it translates into safer communities. But before we jump in, I want to talk about a little bit about the organization Yeah Philly, which I absolutely love, that's doing dynamic work with young people in the West and Southwest Philadelphia area. And Kendra and James, could you tell us a little bit more, give us some context about Yeah Philly, when it was founded and why, and also the model that you guys use for service delivery?
So James and I met at a city meeting that, we had a while ago, long story semi-short, but the conversation was about young people and violence. And so James used to work for the CHOP intervention program, violence intervention program. I used to work for the City Police Advisory Commission. And the conversation oftentimes was about young people and violence, but there were never any young people in the room. So we started by walking around West and Southwest because the rates of youth violence and shootings and homicides are really high, specifically in Southwest, and just talking to young people outside. And that turned into us surveying almost 300 teens and young adults and turning that into running groups at local rec centers and libraries. And those groups turned into between 30 and 50 young people trying to come to, certain workshops and talk about different things. So we built out different components of Yeah Philly, and I'll let James talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so part of our model is based on what young people we surveyed felt was important, but also missing in the community. And again, a lot of the young folks that we've targeted were the young folks who are typically not engaged in sports, any academic programming, but just those those regular young folks that just like to be in a community, unstructured, just trying to figure out like what is it that they want to do, where can they fit in that. So we started to pilot these programs that they identify, which kind of links to some of the things we probably talk about within the social determinants of health, like how can they have access to like medical care, how can they advocate for better quality of food, how can they gather support for those young folks who are in the criminal justice system already. So we started a pilot programs such as sex education, of course, the financial literacy components. We saw that a lot of young people were disconnected from like that civic engagement portion, where they don't know who their leaders and their representatives are and don't know what they can actually go and ask for. So we put together a lot of our programming based on what they felt was the greater need. But ultimately, a lot of it was centered around money. Like young people need money. Like how can we get money if we're not of age to have working papers, or if I don't have all the vital documents to get a job at Home Depot or Lowe's, like what are my other options? So as Kendra mentioned, like it got really big where young people were coming because this is what they wanted. This is what they felt they needed. And again, it turned to this really big thing where we had the pilot program, not just at Cobbs Creek, but at Myers Recreation Center. We even tried piloting in the Northeast at Longcrest Recreation Center, and we saw the greater need exist all around the city. So it turned into this thing where we had to ultimately leave our jobs and just focus on, again, investing in our community. And we've been having great success with it.
And thank you, James, for saying that. I know you are doing a lot of great programs at Philly as it relates to gun violence. But one thing you also talks about the social determinants of health, about like how what young people need are often linked to vital documents and affordable health care. And I just want to pose the conversation to our legislators who are on the call, who not only work in Philadelphia, but who have lived in some of these communities as well, and ask them what have they seen just in their walk as being in Philadelphia, and what are they hearing from some of their constituents about some of the causes, or we call some of the social determinants of health, as we know that is a public health crisis.
I don't know who you want to go first. Future
First.
Dr. Bennett. I'll turn it over to my colleague, to the council member.
Sure. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. First, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel with Philly. They are absolutely one of my favorite programs, and any opportunity that I have to throw them support, I throw them support because they're so good at what they do. In terms of what I'm seeing in my community. So we're definitely seeing, a disparate impact on our neighborhoods in West and Southwest Philly as it relates to gun violence. What I'm finding is that a lot of the violence happens in these really tight geographies, and a lot of it seems to be related to sort of beefs between different blocks or groups or what have you. And so, we've definitely seen this uptick during the pandemic, and I think it relates to neighborhoods being severed from resources, right? Our schools are closed, our rec centers have not all been closed, but certainly have not had active programming for youth, particularly for older youth. People have lost their jobs, people are dealing with sick family members. And so I think historically violence has been driven by a lack of investment in neighborhoods, but over the past year, it's been exacerbated. And I am pushing as a council member for solutions that really respond to that lack of investment, right? I think we need more programs like Philly that can develop trusted relationships with youth, and maybe help youth to manage conflicts in ways that they might not be able to otherwise. I think we need more things for teens, particularly and young adults to do in our neighborhoods. I think people need real jobs that they can use to support themselves and their families. And I think once we are willing to make significant investments in those root causes and in the things that can stop people from picking up a gun in the first place, we'll see success. And so that's my push as a council member. We've never been shy about investing in those 3 C's that you mentioned. We typically make around $700 million of investment in policing, or we have for the past couple of years. We invest massively into the prison system and into the courts. We need to take as bold of an approach with prevention and intervention, and I'm pushing for that this budget cycle, and for groups like Philly to really get the support that they need.
I want to let Representative Kenyatta.
Yeah, and thank you. And I would just, James and Kendra, thank you for what you're doing. Just incredibly inspiring stuff. And I would just build on what everybody has said, and add a 5th C if I could. And I think it's been touched on, is really care. How do we care for people? And this is the preventative stuff that the council member just detailed, at least from the city perspective. I was just with some young people over at the Village of Arts and Humanities, which is in my district, and I was so impressed with what these young folks, many of whom have touched the criminal justice system. They put out a whole pamphlet that was talking about care, not control. And how do we actually invest in young people in a position that's not about, locking them up, that's not about seeing them as dangerous, but actually dealing with what's broken in their communities and the lack of access to, whether it's healthcare, or whether it's mentorship, or whether it is, stable housing. All of these different things feed into the paradigm that has been discussed on this panel so far. If you are a young person who grew up like I did, where you're moving, 4, 5, and 6 times, and you don't have a level of stability, and you're moving into a new community, a new neighborhood, that puts you at risk of being brought into some of these, issues that we're seeing between neighborhoods. And the council member talked about these little geographic pockets, and it's something that we've seen in North Philly as well, where we have this ongoing tension between Pentown and Richard Allen and Spring Garden, and it is just ongoing. And one person gets hurt, and we know that that's going to lead to a couple of weeks of other people ending up, hurt. But when you talk to these folks who are a part of this, what you also are talking about is the lack of access to jobs, as James brought up, is the act of access to adults who care about these young people. And that's why just this weekend, in partnership with the Fraser Foundation, we were just doing something in a part of my district where we just took young kids to go get sneakers. Where there was just, a couple of hours where we went, they got to pick out whatever sneakers they wanted, and we paid for them, and basically said to them, hey, there is somebody who is a trusted adult, multiple trusted adults in the community who just give a damn about you. And I think we take for granted the fact that a lot of people don't grow up or aren't in homes where they're getting those simple words that we all need to hear. I love you. I care about you. And the impact that has on the growth and development of young people can't be understated. And I know that there's, great data and other people who've looked at this that can back that up from an empirical perspective.
And I thank you for raising the 5th C about care. I hope you don't mind me stealing that and putting me in my journal article. I definitely
put it in your dissertation, please, Doc.
Okay. and talking about the care aspect, we know that as Councilmember Jamie Gutierrez has so eloquently pronounced, that we've focused on those 3 C's, especially as those efforts to increase public safety that relied on policing, kind of prosecuting in prisons. And when I want to kind of pivot here, maybe I start with Philly, and then we'll branch out for everyone on the call. What are some of the best practices when it comes to dealing with young people and gun violence, knowing that we don't have a silver bullet approach, that we have some type of limited capacities? But I think a lot of times we dwell on what we can't do, but there are some things that we can do, especially as it relates to the care in our communities. But what are some of those best practices when it comes to dealing with gun violence? Let's start with Philly. And I don't know if Yair wants to chime in as well.
Yeah, I can go first and Yair can go. I don't know if he's there.
Okay, that's fine.
You want me to go first? You want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So I think for us, like we hear about best practices a lot and evidence-based practices, and we have these conversations. So we're actually working on, our annual report from last year, but putting together what best practices are that actually come from young people that we work with, that actually come from our neighborhoods and our communities, because oftentimes we create all of these things that essentially, from our perspective, don't work for the people that we work with. And so we make sure that we are not only just elevating the youth voice, but it has to come from them. And a lot of the stuff that we hear is, they, like James said, they need money. Oftentimes we talk about jobs. Oh, we have to get them jobs. But what does it take to get a young person a job? Our biggest barrier is probably that they don't have access to their vital documents. And if you don't have the original birth certificate, your original birth certificate, you're not able to get a state ID. You're not able to get a job. You can't get these things that oftentimes we oversimplify and just saying that, oh, we need this. So young people always say they need money. Essentially in our neighborhoods, we've surveyed over 300 people, and 86% of them say that making money is so important to them because they feel the need to have to help their family. So they also say that they want more things to do. All of our surveys also show that, if they're not playing basketball, they're out doing whatever, or they're in the house. So things to do, and exposing them to new things and new opportunities. And just like Representative Kenyatta said, we need adults who do care about these young people and building that trust and those relationships. But the biggest best practice is acknowledging young people as the experts of their own lives. They're not going to want the same things that we say that we want for them, but also making sure that the approach is holistic. Every one of their situations is different, and we cannot create things that represent everyone at the same time. Everybody's situation is different. So just meeting them where they are, but providing support on a holistic level, regardless in terms of what that means. Some of them need groceries in their homes. Some of them need their bills paid in their homes. Most of them say they need money in their pockets, but also the skills are the biggest thing as well. And Yair, you can go ahead.
Hello?
So what do you think, Yair, what do you think from your perspective are the things that you need to make your life what you want it to be?
I feel like just distractions mainly, because I feel like when I'm not at Yeah Philly, or I'm not doing something with Yeah Philly, it's like I'm somewhere where I can potentially be in harm's way or something like that. So, but yeah, I feel like sports, stuff like that, just stuff in the community to help me stay out of the way.
And I don't want to put Yair on the spot, but I'm going to put him on the spot. Yair is 14, right? He's 14. All of his friends are older. Like he literally lives the life of an adult. So all of these things, he at 14 years old, he's not able to just go around every day and be that 14-year-old. Like he deals with a lot of things on a daily basis that a lot of 14-year-olds, I grew up in the suburbs. Like when I was 14, I didn't do majority of the things that Yair does. But him saying like he wants these things to do, we as a community have to be providing these things for our young people.
Yeah, and just to add, so part of it is, and one of the reasons we created Yeah too is because like we know there are small pockets of different parts of the city where there are different programming, but all of those things need to be in each community, because what what works for Yair might not work for another kid. But what Yair needs, he shouldn't have to travel to Mount Airy or Northeast to have access to those programs. It needs to be within the community, so that way, and again with Yair brings a lot of his friends to us, and they all need the same similar support. So that's how we care for our community and care for our young people. But it has to start with having access in that community.
Thank you, James, for raising that. I want to ask Council Member Jamie Gauthier on the local level, and even Representative Malcolm Gadd on the state level, we talked about some of those institutional barriers and roadblocks from a programmatic standpoint. But what would it take, I guess, to get some of these programs in other communities? What I've been really advocating for in my community advocacy is that we have to be intentional about the naming and what we ask for. A lot of times we go to city council hearings, or we say that the state representatives are not doing that, but we don't understand how maybe state governments work and the actions, the mechanisms by which these things happen to invest in communities. So if you just share from your perspectives, what are those institutional roadblocks? Do we have to focus our attention on policy, laws, or practices? Is it around budgeting? Is it around access and service? When we think about how do we begin to start this process of community investment, what is it from your particular lens as you sit in city and state government, some things that we could be thinking about doing?
I think the biggest roadblocks are political will and an acknowledgement or an acknowledgement of the things that work, right? It has been well proven that the investments in our communities is what can drive down violence. It has been well proven that preventative measures that focus on people who are participating in gun violence or who are at risk for participating in gun violence, and when we can identify those people and connect them with support, we can change the dynamic and we can help them to change their lives. These are things that have been studied, and there have been programs that have worked across the country to drive down gun violence in communities, both in the short term, by way of interrupting violence, and over the long term, as we make just more critical investments in community, whether that be in recreation or housing or education. We have this stubborn insistence on not shaping our investments around the things that work. We can right now, particularly with a historic investment coming to Philadelphia and cities across the country, say that we're at this moment going to invest in parks and recreation. We're going to invest in youth jobs. We're going to invest in organizations like Philly, who have the trusted relationships on the ground to really impact this violence. We're going to invest more in street outreach and mentorship and mental health resources. That is a decision that we can make right at this moment. And I think we just have to have the political will to to say that we're going to take this care and community aspects as important as we're going to take those other 3 C's that focus more on enforcement. It also touches on policy to some extent, right? Philadelphia would be helped as a city if we could stop the flow of handguns, but that's going to be a fight that's going to continue to wage on at the state level. In the meantime, we have to have a better local strategy around prevention and intervention.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there was like just so much good that was just said, and so I'm happy this is being recorded because people should go back and listen to this conversation again and just do what was just said. So a couple of things. First of all, government can't do everything. Government can't do everything. And I think when you think about Philly and the councilwoman just said it a couple of times, it's the trusted relationships, the relationships that James and Kendra have built with Yair and other young people that a government, bureaucrat, a council member, a state rep is never going to be able to build. And I don't think that that's necessarily our role. But the question becomes, as the council member just said, how do we make sure there are critical and long-term investments in organizations like Philly, not just when we've decided to talk about the crisis of gun violence. This has been an ongoing crisis. We pick moments where we want to focus on it, where the media is talking about it, but this is an ongoing crisis. And so what happens is, okay, it's a crisis right now because it's on TV. And so then you get folks say, okay, well, let's invest in Philly, give a couple of dollars to Philly right now. But how do we create consistent line items that lift up programs like this that can do the work that government cannot do on the ground, building these relationships, becoming trusted partners with young people and with their families, and to do the mentorship and the other things that we talked about with the first question that they need. But the frustrating thing is that government doesn't do the things that we are uniquely in a position to do. That is what is incredibly frustrating. And Jamie just talked about what we need to do in Harrisburg. And I would just mention a bill that I've introduced now multiple times around dealing with lost and stolen guns, at least in my district. I don't know the statistics citywide off the back of my hand, but at least in my district last year, the year before, 2019, 80-something% of all gun homicides that were committed in my district happened with an illegal gun. Somebody who had a gun that was not registered to them. I had a young person, 12 years old, shoot somebody in a playground, a block outside of my district. So it's already illegal for a 12-year-old to have a gun. We know that. So there was an adult who either because they were careless with storing the gun or maybe more nefariously actually gave that weapon to a young kid. How do we begin to hold those folks accountable? And this is something that is deeply popular among registered gun owners to say that we you have to report into this vehicle, from insurance to the people I bought it from. But we don't have that same level of accountability with weapons that are ending up in the hands of young people and that end up, changing a family's life forever. Not just with folks who ultimately die from gun violence, but we also don't talk about the folks who survive gun violence. And when we talk about targeted, focused deterrence, these type of programs that we know can have great success. These are things that, as I said in the beginning, we need to invest in, but we also need to deal with the supply of weapons onto our streets. And that is something that government has completely sat on our hands, like there's nothing we can do about it. And we can do something about it, but what we need is the key word in politics, political will.
Thank you so much for that, Representative Kenyatta. I want to circle back to something Yair said and something that you highlighted, Kendra. He talks about being safe at your Philly and how it has impacted his life. And that can go for a lot of organizations around the city, Hand to Paw, the Monkey and the Elephant, Village for Arts and Humanities, even my organization I represent, the Youth Citizen Entry Project. And we talked about this idea about how powerful youth voices are. And what I loved about this conversation is that when we start developing the conversations for this panel, you said that a young person was going to be on the call. And what I want to know, and this is, I pose a question to everyone, is how can we incorporate more youth voices and youth-led action in the conversation as it relates to advocacy? I know I was on a recent call with Jamie, and young people were sharing their stories about gun violence to the special hearing on children in the city council. I know Malcolm Kenyatta is deeply invested in the Care Not Control, which is producing major reforms as it relates to state placements and how we handle young people. And yet Philly is doing a lot of advocacy work, have a lot of youth in their calls, but how can we incorporate more youth voices as they are the individuals who are the experts, so to say? They're going through these experiences. How can we incorporate them in our advocacy efforts?
I'll just jump in because my answer will be really short. We just have to do it. We just have to do it. We just have to listen. I got involved in civic engagement at 11. I became a junior block captain, and that was the first way I got involved. And so, yes, we can talk about the specificities, but so much of this, it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just whether or not we are going to. I mean, it really is that simple and also that hard at the same time. We just need to do it.
I think Kendra,
I definitely agree with that. I agree with that. And not only just making the space for young people, but really giving them the autonomy to be themselves and be able to express themselves. I feel like oftentimes we say we want young people in spaces, and then when they get there, we're like, oh, that was kind of disrespectful. You can't always talk to us like that. We're politicians, we're adults, you have to respect your elders. So I think, having the discernment to know that, young people, when they're expressing themselves, they're not always going to be politically correct. They're not always going to say the things that we as adults want them to say. And we can't just say, oh, we have one or two spaces for young people, but how are we really going to accommodate those young people to express themselves? And just like Malcolm Kenyatta said, we have to do it. It's not, I don't want to say it is not rocket science in terms of, we just have to invite young people, and not the young people that we cherry pick, not the young people that we say, oh, their behaviors are great, we want these people to represent, our panel or our table, but really giving a space for all young people.
I think I agree with the rep, right? We just have to do it. And I agree with Kendra that when we do create, those spaces, that we have to allow young people to be themselves. And I also appreciate everything. I don't see, is it Jair?
He lost service, he'll be back.
Okay, well, I appreciate everything that he added to this conversation. It was so valuable because it came from his personal experience. I think one of the hardest things on this topic of having spaces for young people is the outreach, right? Like most of us who are in policymaker positions just don't have the connection to young people. The only teenagers I know are my kids and their friends, right? I'm not generally hanging around with teenagers. So I think that's why we need organizations like Yeah Philly, who have those authentic, credible relationships and can really bring young people to the table. So I think we have to be more intentional about engaging groups who do have the connections to young people and who can get them into these discussions. And I would also add, in addition to Kendra's point about letting young people be themselves in those spaces, I would like us to also create more opportunities for young people to have decision-making power, right? Not just to express themselves, but to see their expression show up in our investments and in the way the work actually happens.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one of the things, like young people, they want to be engaged, but they want to know who they're being engaged with. And a lot of times when we talk about having them involved in this whole political process, it would be better if, again, like Jamie comes around a lot. It'd be better if like a lot of our local and state folks, came to their spaces. Like young people shouldn't always have to go to your political space to be engaged and involved. Come to their place where they already feel safe, form that relationship, understand what their processes look like, understand what their roles look like, and let it transition that way. And they're ready. They want to be involved. Like I said, it's just a trust factor, and it can't always be someone who filters, to the political process. Sometimes they just have to have a direct line to you all, and I think that's what we need to just be aggressive with and being open about.
I think that was really good answer, James. I want to talk about what are some possible solutions to gun violence from a community perspective. A lot of times when we talk about solution to gun violence, we often are including cops, we're talking about judges, we're talking about changing the system. And I mentioned to say that because I went to a site visit at Yeah Philly, and it was they had this long line, there was a lot of commotion, the phone was ringing off the hook, and they were paying people's bills in the community, and it was doing so much good. I tried to get in the line, they refused me. I'm still trying to work with James around that, see if I can submit my lane. But I thought that was an interesting perspective. When we think about gun violence, we often think about more handcuffs, we think about more prisons, but I never thought about paying people's bills, how that can change community. And Todd Clear talks about this idea of community justice, which refers kind of to this aspect of all crime prevention that give community members decision-making abilities and a commitment to quality of life issues as an explicit goal, right? So it's to help to make the places where people live, work, and raise their places good things to do so. From a community standpoint, maybe we start with Yeah Philly. What are some possible solutions to gun violence?
So I think it goes back to the trust and the relationships. If we historically have showed neighborhoods that we don't care about them, we have to start there and build that trust. So we create a community, even though we service young people, we show our community we still care about you, which is why we have our teen-led food and resource bank. Anybody knows they can call us or come by our space for groceries whenever they need to. They know that if we're not able to help them, they know that they can come to us and say, well, I know that they'll at least tell me and help me get to where I need to go in terms of a service, even if I'm an adult. So creating that just trust in the community, and also just directly investing people, right? So we pay bills because we know that our neighborhoods, they're poor. Like, people need money. People were coming to us with $5,000 and $6,000 bills. So, making sure that we're showing people we care about you. We can't pay all your bills. That day we paid $40,000 worth of people's bills from our own just general fund money, which wasn't even a drop in what really people need. And people were saying that they have never had someone who showed that they cared about them like that. And they say all the time, your young people are so nice to us. Oftentimes when we go and get free stuff, people are not nice to us. So showing people that you love and care about them. And in terms of young people, that social and emotional support is really big. A lot of times, we see young people who carry guns and they're, shooting and doing these things. But a lot of times nobody, like Malcolm said, has ever told them that they love them or showed them that, we give hugs all the time. In the beginning, we met people, they're like, oh no, I don't need you need a hug. And we give hugs, and that's what we do here. And it's okay. It's okay to show your emotions, and it's okay to ask for help and show people that you care about them. So that is probably one of the biggest solutions. Put your money where your mouth is, show some empathy, and show people that you care about them, because once you get past that, then we can work on all the other things. And the biggest thing we've been able to do is resolve a lot of conflicts that, a lot of our kids that we work with, they carry guns, and they carry guns because they say they don't feel safe in their neighborhood, and that, something may happen because of where they live. We have these conversations all the time. We mediate a lot of community issues that go on where, yes, there may have been something that happened before, but the point is not to escalate it to something bigger, and show people that some of the issues and most of the issues can be resolved. Figuring things out and talking with those other people, because a lot of times our young people do not have the skills to communicate. And so conflict resolution relative to what young people experience, and we believe in peer mediation as well, and having young people trained up in helping them resolve their issues is a huge thing that more people need to do.
James, I want to comment here too. I know you've been in the community a long time as well.
So part of it is, and it is a direct link to like violence reduction, is like having access. A lot of the resources are around jobs and education and training, but we skip this step that young people don't even have the vital documents, the IDs, and those type of things to even get to that step of having opportunity. So we need to invest in more support for those type of things, so that way our young people do have opportunities. So that's one of the biggest things we've been seeing. Young people want to do the right thing, want to feel safe and not carry weapons and things of that sort. But they know that the resource to help them get over that hump is very limited. And we've been able to help a lot of people get vital documents. We've been able to help a lot of people get jobs as a direct result of having vital documents. So we need to focus on a lot of those things and make it a priority. And I'm almost certain that a lot of young people who see opportunities just skip past them because they don't even have the things they need, the necessary things they need to get connected. So we need to focus on a lot of those things in our communities.
Thank you, James. And as we kind of end the plane here and get ready to take some Q&A questions just from the people on the webinar, I wanted to ask, maybe this is a toss-up question for Representative Kenyatta and Councilmember Jamie. If you had the power to do anything, whether that be in your communities or maybe when you go back to the State House or maybe when you go back to City Hall, what would you do as it relates to community investments and making communities safer?
I would make many more investments in violence prevention and intervention. I would, number one, I would get more money to organizations who are, really embedded in communities like Philly. Currently, we're investing about $2 million in support to grassroots organizations doing violence prevention through the Office of Violence Prevention at the city, and the mayor just proposed raising that by $500,000. Why not many more millions of dollars, right, to groups that are really effective at what they do and have the relationships and the trust where they can support young people at this difficult time. So more money to grassroots organizations, more money to Parks and Rec to make sure that we have rec centers that can really respond to what youth, both the younger and older youth, want to see in our communities. I will put more money into street outreach. Currently, we have community crisis intervention that's going out into communities. Credible messengers are going out and talking to young people and trying to quell conflicts. I talked recently with the folks doing street outreach in my district. They think they need 3 times the amount of people that they currently have really going out into our neighborhoods. And I would invest more in evidence-based approaches that interrupt violence, whether that be group violence intervention or programs like Advanced Peace that has worked out on the West Coast or already Chicago, programs that really focus on the folks that are participating in this activity and provide them with support and an opportunity to really choose a different track.
I'll hand it over to.
Yeah, it has been said multiple times on this call. People need money. People need money. My first job was 12. I got a job under the table at a restaurant, and those folks, frankly, helped save my life, because I was able to, first of all, have somewhere to go that had a level of safety, but also I was able to help my family who, was having a difficult time. And that is the reality for so many young people right now who are 12, 13, and 14, who are having to live the life of an adult, as Kendra said about Yair. People need money, and it's why I say all the time, you bring up an issue from gun violence to climate change to whatever else, and you're talking about an issue of deep poverty. And so finding ways to really turn the tide on the deep poverty that we see in our communities is something that is key, because a lot of the violence bubbles out of that as well. I'll never forget, crying with a constituent of mine whose son was shot over a freaking cell phone, a cell phone. And so, that sounds like a small thing, but if that's your only mode of communication, if that's the only phone you'll probably ever be able to, afford, for somebody who's like, oh, I'll just go buy a new phone, I'm not gonna murder anybody. They don't understand, how critical some of these things are for people. And so, when James is talking about paying people's bills and how much of an impact that has, that right there can change the whole tide for a young person and for their families, just having more money in their pockets. And so it is about changing the frame of how we look at investments in people. When we invest in people, we call it an entitlement. When we invest in corporations, we call it economic development. We need to be talking about how we develop communities where folks have been locked out for decades, for generations, from an economic pathway that provides a level of dignity.
I think you just dropped the mic right there. That's another thing I'm gonna have to put in the dissertation. When we invest in people, we call it an entitlement, but when we invest in corporations, that's just economic development. And I think those words echo the sentiments with this call. And I want to thank all of my colleagues for joining here. Before we turn it over to the Q&A, I have some questions in the chat, but I'm often reminded of everything that was said today of the poet William Everett Hell. He wrote these words. He says, I'm only one. He says, but I am one. He says, I can't do everything, but I can do something, and I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do. So I think there's something that we all can do, and we can't let the things that we cannot do interfere with what we can do. Question in the chat really quickly. Someone asked me that, what do the policymakers think that the community can do as it relates to changing the political will of their colleagues who don't see things their way. I think you talked about political will. So I think the question is, what can the community do as it relates to shifting the political will for colleagues who don't see the investment in communities the way that we all may have talked about and detailed on the call?
Reach out to your representatives. Reach out to the people who are making these decisions. We are in budget time as a city. The mayor and council will be working through about the third week of June to deliver the next, the budget for the next fiscal year to Philadelphians. And what the mayor and every council member needs to hear is that you all want to see investments in communities and investments in grassroots organizations like Yeah Philly, and in the preventative measures that can stop people from picking up a gun in the first place. Your policymakers need to hear that loudly and clearly, and they need to hear it now, particularly with $1.4 billion from the federal government coming to our city, over the next several months.
This question always really, really excites me. And I always say to folks, stop giving away your power. I think that folks think, oh, I elected somebody, and so they're going to handle it. But when I think about any time we've seen systemic change or big things done, it didn't just happen just because you have good folks in office. You need good folks in office, like the councilwoman, like other folks who are really leading the charge. But think about what happened when we passed 4 bills related to police reform in Harrisburg. Important bills. Those bills weren't introduced because of the tragic murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those bills had been there. But those bills moved and they were passed unanimously because we saw protests in 61 of 67 counties. That's the way that bill was passed. It wasn't some special sauce of something that happened in the building. It was something that was happening outside of the building, where the folks in the community made it crystal clear, if you don't do something, there's going to be a problem. And so, yes, vote. That's important. Yes, elect the best people. That's important. But maybe this is me coming to politics from the vantage point of a community organizer. But the power always remains with the people. And so Jamie can introduce whatever she wants. But if there is not a movement on the street, as she just said, if the mayor and other council people aren't hearing, yes, make the types of investments that the councilwoman is talking about, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen from a speech that she gives. It's not going to happen from a bill that she moves through committee. It's going to happen because people in the community are fed up and they're loud about it. They're vocal about it. And they're using their collective voice to sing from the same hymnal. And so elect good people, but don't forget the role that you play in determining and allowing for important things to be passed on.
And I don't see any more questions in the chat. And it's 12:56. And before we turn over to the College of Public Health, maybe we can just go around and we'll go around to everyone. And I want to ask the question, even though we have a lot of work to do to invest in communities to get our community safer, what are you hopeful for as an organization, as a Philadelphian, maybe even as a politician? What are you hopeful for? And no one has to go first. Just whoever comes to mind. What are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful that I know all violence in Philadelphia won't stop, but I hope that some of it does stop because it's getting crazy and we keep losing loved ones.
What are you hopeful for, James? Someone's going to just pick on you. You are.
I mean, I think, I'm hopeful that, like most of the great movements started with young people. I'm just hopeful that young people start to get more involved and really start to lead the charge. And I think we get a sense of that on our end, but we're just one small pocket. But we're just hoping that at some point, if not this year, but for the next couple of years, like this is really like a youth-led movement throughout Philadelphia.
Representative Kenyatta, what are you hopeful for?
Ultimately, I'm hopeful because of folks like Yair. Seriously, when I look at this young brother and hear the words that he shared on this call, it makes me really, really hopeful. James just said it best. When you think of any movement, from civil rights to women's rights, LGBTQ rights, always, 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 young people have been on the vanguard of those movements. And so when I see folks like Yair speaking up and getting engaged, that gives me a lot of hope, because a lot of the folks who don't have the political will, as Jamie and I both work with some folks who don't have the political will to do what we need to do, these young people do. And they're voters, they're becoming voters right now. And so I'm incredibly and inspired by the young people that Philly gets to work with every day.
Councilmember Jamie Gauthier, what are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful that we finally reach the moment where we can deal with the issue of gun violence with compassion and move forward to make the investment in people and communities that we need to make, not just to change this dynamic in the moment, but to really create healthy and safer communities over the long term.
And I'll give you the last words, Kendra. What are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful that we can put people first. I mean, we can put our money where our mouths are. You know, we invest in the things that we want. We make sure that condos are developed and, you know, all of these things are there. So I believe that we need to start, I'm hopeful we can start putting our money into our people.
And as a moderator, I'm going to end there at 12:59 to get us right on track. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to have conversations where we include researchers, elected officials, both on the state and local side, as well as amazing organizations like the affiliate that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. Thank you for everyone who have tuned in with us and have asked us amazing questions. And big shout out to Temple University and the College of Public Health for holding these conversations, give us a space to talk about these critical conversations as it relates to community investments and how we keep our community safer. So I'll turn it back to.
And thank y'all too for everything that we talked about, everything that y'all helped us with. Have a nice day.